Okay, today I thought we'd talk about vintage smokers used in toys. As you can see here, I'm running this one. Let's shut this down. This is one you can actually build yourself for very little money if you're interested. And I'm going to think I'll cover that in another video, build video, showing how you can 3D print the parts and how it's all done. But I thought you might find it interesting just to look at some different smokers and see how they are used and done. Here's a metal can smoker. You can see it's had a hose in and out, and it doesn't, in this particular case, it doesn't matter which one's in and which out. It's a metal sealed. They actually soldered up the hole where they put in the light grade oil. Back then they'd use light grade petroleum oil, like sewing machine oil, gun oil, 3-in-1 oil. And they gave it a particular smell that all of us old farts that had those toys love. This one that I was just demonstrating here I actually have filled with the modern petroleum oil made for smokers, mostly for people that collect trains. It doesn't have any smell, but it still produces all of the smoke. So inside this metal can there is a small heating element. The bulk of this lower part of this can is filled with cotton, and it comes up through a small hole, so there's only a little bit of the cotton coming up and touching the heating element, and it wicks the oil up, and as air passes through it then produces the smoke. When air doesn't move, it actually doesn't smoke. You need oxygen in order for that to work. So that's one type. Now newer than that, so this would have been more like 1950s, early 60s. This particular smoker is out of like the Magic Mike, you know, the Tomy Magic Mike type bump and go robots. A lot of them talked and smoked. Some of them just smoked. When they got really cheap, they didn't talk and they didn't smoke, they just bump and go. Anyway, this plastic construction had a screw in the top of the head where there was actually a sticker in the top of the head that said remove the screw to put in a few drops of light grade oil to get things going again. So they designed this one where the cotton wool sometimes is used up here, and there is the divider again, so only a small little few threads of the cotton come down to the heating element, which is across these two wires. It'll be a nichrome wire, generally a very small gauge, like 0.08. And in the Magic Mics, they use a bellows to move the air. Down in the bump and go system, there'll be a tube that comes from here all the way down into the bellows, and there's a plastic bellows that gets bumped by a cam, and that pumps the air through, and then that went out the mouth or wherever they wanted the smoke to go. So that is like the Magic Mike type. Now this is one that was used in a reproduction Chief Smokey robot. So this would be probably the newest one, other than the one I'm going to show you how to build. But you can see it works in the same type of way. You can almost see up in there. Much smaller area for the cotton to hold, so it isn't going to hold much oil. And in the top they have the two connections, which again are going to go down to the nichrome wire. And in this case, usually the large hole is the output, and the small hole is what's going to go down to the bellows, which is going to kick the air out. Now here, pop the top off of it, and I don't even know if that wire will show up or focus, but there's a little teeny fine wire there. You can see where they've looped the cotton wool up, and that goes all the way down, so there's very, very small amount of area where they're reserving for the oil. Not meant to last very long, and it wouldn't. This larger one, this would have been like out of the bump and go trains. You know, they weren't trains that ran on a track. They were a bump and go train. They usually had 3D cells. The really fancy earlier ones not only had a wind-blown whistle on them for going toot toot, but they usually had a headlight on the front. They usually had a mechanical bell inside dinging, and then this was mounted in the smokestack part of it. And the way it's designed, you actually could get in there to add more fluid if you needed to. It's got its heater coils clear down here. They brought air in to blow across the filament and up the stack, and this went to a bellows. And back then they were normally a paper bellows. Think of it as a top and bottom and cardboard, and a cardboard seam here, and then paper around the whole outside, and there was to be a spring on the inside, and a cam would push on it, and the bellows and the air would shoot out, and that's how we get the puffing going on there. Back when Tin Tom Toys did a reproduction of the smoking robot, he came up with a design, because he didn't want to have to make a separate bellows, where he was going to use a piston, and this piston is driven by a cam down on the smoking robot, so when it stopped walking and did that, he had a strong return spring inside here, way stronger than it needed to be. It actually causes some issues with the mechanics. And the biggest design problem, well, there were two design problems besides the stiff spring with this, is that the air in this design doesn't pass by the heating wire and the filament before it goes to the output tube. The air actually, you can see here, could go from these piston, we'll call it the bellows, but it's a piston, and go out. In a better design, the air from that piston would have come up the backside, so it had to pass the heating wire before it went to the output, would have moved more. But really the largest design issue with this came down to the really small, here's one I've cut in half, this really small area. See, this cap was on top of the whole thing. That's all of the cotton wool and oil reservoir they had. This little bit out here is what would contact the heating wires. So it's very small amount of oil or smoke fluid reservoir before it would run out. But again, it's being sold as a collectible, and they didn't figure people are going to keep running in a whole lot. So if it smoked for, say, 2 battery changes, then that was probably enough. Now, not all of the toys that used smokers used bellows or pistons. There was, I'll put links to this down below, but there was the Jetmoke spaceship, or Jetmoke flying saucer, or as most collectors just call it, the Jetmoke toy, and it actually had a fan blown. There was well, I should say one other thing before we move on to that. In all of these designs, these heating units that are in here, which normally draw anywhere from 300 to 500 milliamps, so close to half an amp, they're on all the time. Anytime the toy is turned on, whether they're smoking or not, at that point, the heating element is on, sucking all that current and life out of your batteries. So, moving on to the Jetmoke saucer that I was just talking about, that has a small fan that blows air through the smoker. It is one of the only ones that actually, the fan blows through the smoker all the time, but the toy doesn't smoke all the time. They actually made a mechanical switch that turns the power on to the smoker only when they want the Jetmoke to happen, and then turns it off again. So it was more efficient. There was actually a lighting effect that's happening as the spaceship is bumping and going, and what would happen is the spaceship would stop bumping and going, the light effect would turn off, the power would be diverted to the smoker, which had 2 exhaust ports, just one smoker though, and it just bellows out the smoke like crazy. Then that turns off, the light turns back on, and bump and go. So they were basically saving the power for the toy so it could run a little bit longer, and it was a good idea. Now there was another toy that didn't use bellows or a piston, and that would have been Remco's Mr. Brain, which is a very large plastic robot that had cams in it that you could put in to make it steer and go in different directions and stuff. But at the very top of its head there was a little smokestack, and in that smokestack there is a heater which is on all the time, and a small reserve for the oil, but at least you could drop more oil down the stack when that ran out so you could replenish it. But what they did is The smokestack's in the head's bolted to the body, and clear down in the body there's a little jack shaft coming up with a propeller on it, of all things, a little fan blade. And that fan blade is simply moving some air upward through the body, through the head, and eventually it would waft out through the smokestack in the top of the robot. I'm going to swing this camera around to some YouTube videos that I've done on a few of these different toys, because you might find it interesting. I will attempt to put links to this. This particular video right here actually covered 3 or 4 different toys, but near the end I spent the most time talking about the Jetmoke one. This is the one that has a lighting effect and has 2 exhaust ports, and it just dumps the smoke out. Then much earlier than this I had done a video on the insides of it. The video quality is poor because this video goes back so many years. I was still on dial-up here, so I had to compress the heck out of the video before I could put it up. But this is actually showing the smoker, and I took the top off of it, and I'll put a link to that video as well. And then here is a video that I did a long time on the Mr. Brain, made in USA, 1969. And here's the smokestack. The smoker's up in there. Like I say, the neck and all this is hollow. And clear down here in the body, right about here, there's a little propeller that turns, and it just simply gently moves air up through so smoke would waft out the top of the robot's head. Alright, I think that's about all I wanted to tell you about vintage smokers. How they use the nichrome wire to basically heat up, in the old ones, oil. In newer ones, let me grab this bottle here. You might find this interesting. This is an example of a smoke fluid that's generally used by trained people, but I use it to replenish all my vintage toys to get them smoking. Now this is there's different types of smokers, you know. These aren't e-cigarettes, these are smoking toys, so this needs a petroleum-based, I guess you hold it that way, petroleum-based smoke fluid. And this particular one doesn't have very much odor at all. Whereas if you really want the stink of the old toys, then you just go in with some light grade sewing machine or gun oil or 3-in-1 oil. You can even use WD-40. It'll kick up a nice smoke fume too. So I think I'll do a video on how you can build one yourself, and even if you don't want to build one, you might find it interesting because you can use that same information that'll be in the video. What kind of background do I need? I guess I shouldn't be shining it into the light. It's going to show up better with a dark background. How you can build one of these. Let's just tap it. For very little money. So you can make your own smoking toys. And I'll even provide a link for the nichrome wire in case you want to try to repair one of the older vintage toys. The problem with some of the older vintage toys being if they were in a plastic enclosure is you may not be able to get in there to replace the nichrome wire. And in reality, normally the nichrome wire isn't your problem. It normally won't burn out unless someone has done something stupid like hook more batteries up to the toy. Say if it's a 3-volt toy and they hit it with 3 batteries, 4.5 or 6 volts or something, trying to get the toy going. Hey, you could burn it out that way. But as long as you're running the toy on the amount of voltage it was designed for, you're normally not going to burn out the nichrome wire.